Before we can even answer the question that they've posed, we need to figure out what they mean by avoidance of pain. Because this is such a weird way to phrase this idea, right? So I did a little bit of digging, and I came across this PragerU video about the differences between the left and the right, and how that difference comes down to the left's fear of pain.
I do like that. I didn't see the thumbnail before. You have the left is covering its eyes, hiding, and the right is like, I've got the magnifying glass with the all-seeing eye behind.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well done, PragerU. Well done.
But listen to how they define pain.
At the core of left-wing thought is a denial of painful realities, the denial of what the French call les faits de la vie, facts of life. Because people on the left find it too painful to look reality in the eye and acknowledge that human nature is deeply flawed. One might say that leftism appeals to those who wish to remain innocent. Growing up and facing the fact that life is messy, difficult, and painful is increasingly a conservative point of view.
To PragerU, pain is basically the acknowledgement of the tough fact of life. Reality sucks, and people are inherently bad, and leftists are just afraid of believing that's the case. And they're avoiding pain by being hopeful and optimistic, by believing that the world can get better and that people are good.
See, I almost said this, that the left is inherently optimistic and the right is a bit pessimistic. Like, you don't come to the fear of unintended consequences if you're an optimist. Like, you kind of have to be optimistic to overcome that.
Well,
but she lays it out. She's basically saying, yeah, the left is totally optimistic.
but here's the problem. It's kind of like there's elements of that that's true, but there's elements of that that are false, because the whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps position is a completely optimistic
it is optimistic
position.
You're right. Yeah.
And the whole
you're right.
And maybe there's some issue here too, because we have to differentiate like liberal from leftist.
That's an interesting point that you make, but I think it's being driven by different moral intuitions than optimism. But go ahead, I interrupted you.
Well, no, yeah, because leftists are completely pessimistic about they're optimistic about some things. They're optimistic about being able to create a perfect society or a better society. That's true, but they're completely pessimistic about current society fixing any problems. I mean, this is the whole, we had that whole conversation about CRT the other day, and it's all that there's these systems that are so ingrained in racism and subjugation that people literally can't break free of them. I mean, it's an incredibly pessimistic view. Or that there's a Nazi hiding behind every rock and every tree waiting to, pounce on you. So I don't think, and on the other hand, the right is optimistic in terms of if you follow traditions and customs and, traditional social norms, you'll be happy and you'll have a better life outcome. And then they're completely pessimistic if you want to change anything. Oh, if you want to change, you're going to ruin everything. That's the way towards, anarchy and the downfall of society and degradation. So I don't think it's that the left is optimistic and the right's pessimistic. They're both optimistic and pessimistic about their own processes, essentially.
The left is optimistic about change and pessimistic about stagnation, and pessimistic about tradition. Yeah.
Right, and the right is the opposite. Right.
So maybe optimism and pessimism are a bad thing. In the case of the bootstraps, I think it's not optimism driving their signing off on the bootstraps argument. I think it's the intuition is, pay your own dues, reciprocity. I think is a moral intuition.
Well, that's true, but
Fairness.
It's optimism. It's optimism that if you act in that way, it will produce good results for you and for society.
Right.
And that society will fairly reward you for working hard.
which is often not the case.
Which is often not
Yeah.
the case, right?
Yeah.
It can be, but it often is not the case.
Talk about ignoring painful realities.
Or look at, I mean, when it comes to like free market solutions, the right is, I would say, often way too optimistic in believing if you just leave markets alone, if you just leave businesses alone and get rid of regulations, then, the
Yeah.
market will just solve every problem, right?
Yeah.
So on the question of human nature, I think you can say the left is definitely more optimistic, at least currently. As I said, I don't think that's necessarily historic. But on the question of human nature, right now, the left is more optimistic and the right is more pessimistic. But I don't think that applies to like everything. I don't think the
Right.
left is generally more optimistic and the right is generally more pessimistic. I don't think that's true.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
They are afraid of the facts of life that are too painful to acknowledge. But I think that pain is more than that, too. If we look at a lot of their other videos, we can see that pain to them is also hard work and failure and not getting your way. Pain is any amount of discomfort or conflict. And this is something that we could
Hold on, let
apply
me go
to
back
any
to that. I want to see those thumbnails.
failure and not getting your
The war on work, trophies are for winning. Why are so many good things being destroyed?
All of this is Fairness Cheating Foundation. All of it is reciprocity is the moral intuition that they're leaning on here. But I don't think Zoe understands. I mean, in the context of pain,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she doesn't even really take reciprocity into account. Like if you're going to work, there is like a, work is not fun. Like a job is defined as something someone doesn't want to do. So obviously that's going to be painful. I mean, pain is such a weird way to contextualize it, but.
Well, I mean, there's a more conservative mindset, obviously. That's the classic spare the rod, spoil the child idea. And that's definitely what's PragerU's alluding to when they talk about like trophies are for winning. Everyone should get a participation trophy because they're basically saying, you need to condition children and people to compete and to cope with the fact that they will lose unless they work hard. And this is all in order to basically create stronger people who will work harder.
Right. Yeah. You understand what I mean by reciprocity, though, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Like, there's this thing that the left, like, they often want to throw proportionality away. Like, the whole idea behind a trophy is that, we have people who work proportionally harder and therefore get a larger share of the rewards, as in the first place trophy. Right?
Right. Well, it's like, okay, so using the trophy example, it'd be like, imagine that there's a kid who spends, I don't know, 10 hours a week practicing basketball.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And then there's another, we'll say Jimmy practices basketball for 10 hours a week for a month. And Tommy practices basketball for 5 hours a week a month. But Tommy is just a better natural athlete. And Jimmy maybe is a shitty natural athlete. So Tommy just blows Jimmy away when it comes to basketball. And so they feel like, well, it's not fair because, Jimmy worked harder. So therefore, that the working harder should be acknowledged, essentially.
Well, I think the example Zoe's setting up is, there's Jimmy and Tommy, but then there's Larry who sleeps all day and smokes weed and plays video games. And then he shows up and he can't even play basketball. But he gets a trophy too.
Right. Okay. So it's important who was what was the guy's name that you just used?
Larry.
Larry. Okay. So the example I put forward with Jimmy and Tommy, that's like the left's version. Like that's like their version of events, right?
Right. Yes.
But then you have, the right-wing person, Dennis Prager, says, but wait a minute.
What about Larry?
What about Larry? Larry is just sitting on his ass doing nothing.
Right.
Why does he get a participation? So obviously that's
the
right-wing response.
this is the conflict here, because
Right.
the right wing really thinks left wingers want to destroy the law of karma. Like, they're thinking Larry doesn't get a fucking trophy. Larry gets kicked off the team. Larry
Right.
gets kicked. Larry never gets to play basketball again, right? They want some karma here.
Well, so there are some people on the left that would say, fuck Larry, but they want to construct a system that helps, the Jimmies of the world. And they'll say, well, unfortunately, it'll help the Larrys of the world, and there's nothing you do about it. But there's also some people on the left that say, no, 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 because Larry, he has some deep
Society has
psychological,
destroyed him.
systemic reasons for why he wants to smoke pot and play video games, and it's not his fault. It's because,
Society.
his parents, raised him poorly, and why should he be
Right.
penalized for that? Blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 blah.
His dad's in jail.
Exactly.
Poor
His dad's
Larry.
in jail. Yeah, he was started to do drugs at a young age.
Right, yeah. He never got to have a cat.
The thing is that that's all true, but I don't think giving a participate. This is the problem, and that's why there's neither side has the correct answer to this. The right is correct to point out the Larrys. I apologize to any Larrys in our audience that we're besmirching. The right in our audience is correct to point out the Larrys, and that the Larrys shouldn't get participation trophies. And then the left is correct to point out that the Larrys exist for some reason that's not their fault necessarily, but then no one can ever figure out what's the correct thing to do about it.
Well, at some point, you got to blame somebody. You can't just let Larry off the hook because...
Mm-hmm. Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, it is Larry's fault. If you
Yeah.
believe in free will, that is. Which is a contentious topic here at the Sitch Adam show.
This is very contentious. I just...
But I'm
sooner or
just
later,
saying
you
that,
gotta
like,
give Larry some tough love.
right, but maybe that's the solution. I don't know. Maybe that is the solution.
That is the solution.
Send them all off to military school. There you go. That's the solution.
Yeah. Larry doesn't get a trophy.
Right. Unfortunately, that costs money, though, so the right's not going to be on board with that.